All right, call number three with the master, Andrew Clay. Thanks for joining me again. Appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me on.
All right, so what we wanted to talk about today, we wanted to get your thoughts on pacing to performance, not pacing on a calendar. And we're specifically talking about budget. So on smaller accounts, you usually just set a daily budget, you scale it by a percentage, and you let it run no matter what day of the week it is or what time it is. You're just running the same budget consistently. But you explained that that's not really the way it works on larger spend accounts. Can you help me understand that a little bit more?
Yeah, absolutely. Going back to kind of the aircraft carrier versus speedboat model, it's a lot harder and takes longer to pivot for a larger account. And of course, like a 5% swing on $1 million a month spending account is going to be a lot more significant than a 5% swing on a $10,000 a month account. So with the larger accounts, it's really important to just plan ahead and do as much forecasting on the front end of the month as as you can, and really the front end of the quarter to kind of see, all right, what promo days are coming up, where are we going to need to have a little more headroom in our budget, what slow seasons are coming up, always looking at the year over year kind of seasonality in that week by week e-commerce marketing calendar, and then setting your forecast and your targets based on that.
So it's all planned ahead of time. It's not like you're deciding during the day, oh, there's a strong performing day, increase the budget. This is all pre-planned weeks or months in advance.
You try to plan as much as possible. However, there are times where, something is smoking, it's on fire in a good way, and you do want to give it more liquidity. And for that, you do want to have a good sync up with the brand to understand, all right, do we have the liquidity to push? If so, this is kind of what our plan is to lean into that. This happens a lot during sales where specifically on the larger accounts, we'll plan kind of a daily starting budget that we'll go into a sale with. But if it's doing really well, generally looking at, well, it depends on the model. That's kind of a different conversation. But like if it's doing well and our KPIs are all showing green and we want to lean into it, we'll make sure that like the brand is looped in and we have kind of everything queued up to be able to scale rapidly. An example of this is we have a brand that is focuses on survival and prepping, selling, anywhere from generators to food to stuff that really moves well based on the news cycle. So the forecasting and planning for that brand is much different than kind of a seasonal e-commerce brand that might be selling, swimwear or jackets or something that you can very much predict the demand cycle. So for brands like that, it's much more real time, and you're really looking at your KPIs and feeding the account as much as possible. It's kind of like tuna fishing. When the tuna are running and you're on the tuna and all the poles start, all the reels start going out, you just got to start letting bait out and reeling fish in. And so you do want to be ready for that time, but kind of the thing is just making sure that your plan has that budgeted in case there's a peak moment that you can maximize.
So it's seasonal and cyclical. Like you need to follow the regular trends, the regular sales cycles, products change throughout the seasons, but it's also just following consumer data. And if everybody's hot on a certain news topic or hot on a certain item, you have to be ready to jump on it pretty quickly.
Yeah, absolutely. And ensure the brand has like a cash flow management system worked out to be able to provide that liquidity. That's probably one of the big pain points for early stage e-commerce brands is you might have a product that's super hot, but do you have the cash flow and cycle to be able to support the ad spend that's needed to maximize that moment? Um,
Yeah, it's
yeah.
it's interesting you say that. I've worked with a few e-commerce brands, and some of the bigger folks that I work with, they talk about, like, if they're an individual founder, they talk about a safe withdrawal rate. And surprisingly, I think a safe withdrawal rate is between 2 to 3% of the revenue that you're actually bringing in, because the rest you have to keep as liquidity in the company to be able to afford to keep running ads, keep buying new inventory. It's not an easy business model, that's for sure.
It really isn't, but I think working with the right credit provider that gives you the right terms can be extremely beneficial. Facebook, obviously, if you're large enough, they can give you invoicing, but most brands we work with, they like those credit card points, they like that cash back. So it's about finding a credit partner that understands the needs of liquidity and also, you're setting a good a good, forget the word, but a good time frame for collecting on that. So
Do you have a
that's a big part of it. And then, oh, sorry, that's a big part of it. And then also like kind of diving into the actual adjustments in Facebook's like kind of algorithm in adjusting your budget, because that's changed a lot in the last year as well.
Yeah, so let's talk about that then. I guess how do you leverage Meta's learning system while still controlling the budget?
It's gotten more and more difficult. One of the big updates this last year with Meta has been this kind of new rule that they can spend up to 70% of your daily budget in one day, or 70% over your daily budget in one day. Because now instead of pacing on a daily, they're pacing on a weekly. So your campaign setting could be pacing daily, but you might see days where, let's say you have $1,000 a day spend on an ad set. That ad set could spend up to $1,700 because Meta's calculating it to the rest of the week, which actually resets on Sunday. I recently had kind of a flag in an ad account where we launched a test. It was an A/B two cell A/B test, and both ad sets were starting at $2,500 a day. Now we launched the test on Wednesday, and for the first 4 days of the test, it spent 45. Each ad set spent $4,500 a day.
Wow.
Um, and we messaged our rep. We're like, what's going on here? Like, why is it overpacing in such a high spend? Now, granted, the performance wasn't there either. That's what's kind of that's what's a little debatable. Is Meta would say, oh, this is just a feature to kind of pace pace according to performance. But on Northbeam, we were not seeing the performance that we needed to on this test, and it was really diminishing our liquidity. And the feedback we got was like, oh, because the budget's reset on Sunday, it actually was spending your full weekly budget in those first few days of the test, even though we had a daily cap on it. So something that you can do to mitigate that is put spend thresholds on the account, on the campaign level, to just make sure, or even the ad set level, to make sure that it does not go above that spend. But that's something to keep in mind. Fortunately, it was a smaller spend ad set, but if this was a $50,000 to $60,000 a day ad set, like that's a significant amount of capital that's getting spent just because of the calendar day that you're launching the campaign on.
Right, right.
Um,
And I guess for a lot of brands, that would be really counterintuitive to spend a lot higher on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, when you might see higher performance at the later end of the week, like Thursday, Friday, Saturday.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's probably why it spent, because we did launch on a Wednesday. That's probably why it spent higher, is because it was going into the weekend, assuming there would be more inventory in the auction. But at the same time, it was just way beyond what we really wanted to enter this test at. And then we did follow the test through. We ran it for 2 weeks. Unfortunately, the test didn't, it did both cells didn't perform, and it didn't really give us the confidence in the test cell to really move forward with the strategy as a whole.
So, what do you do in these situations moving forward? Do you put a spend cap at the campaign level or ad set level, or do you just enter the test at a lower budget, knowing that there's a possibility Meta's going to overspend by 70%?
Yeah, I think it's really important to see where it paces at on the first day. And then if it does look like it's pacing hot, you can put a spend cap. It really depends. It's a kind of a case by case basis.
Gotcha.
Some
Gotcha.
some brands are very strict in their budget, especially some of the larger brands. They might say, hey, you have X million dollars this month that you can spend. In that case, it's really important, especially on the front end of the month, to make sure that you're not deviating from that plan too much. Um, you can very easily get in a scenario where maybe you're deviating from the plan, ten to $15,000 a day, but that really adds up on the front end of the month, where by the end of the month you're now having to chop your campaigns back by $10,000 to $15,000 a day or more sometimes, because you might be 5 to 10% off plan by the 25th, which really gives you, five days to kind of course correct to come in at the budget that they're planning for. Now, a lot of times, if the MER is good and performance is strong, that's okay. A lot of, larger brands kind of have that liquidity to be able to increase their budget. However, sometimes it's a scenario where other channels might not have been performing as well. The overall MER is weaker, even though your channel is doing strong. And just to come in an alignment with the finance team, you have to pull back pretty significantly on your channel in order to meet those targets, which has in my opinion, a longer compounding effect on the acquisition for the following month. So it's really important that you're planning out as far and ahead of time, just as you would, a cruise ship or an aircraft carrier, because you can't get into a situation and then quickly pivot as fast as you could if you're in a speedboat.
Yeah, so it's not just Meta's algorithm. You need to watch out for over under pacing. You also need to think of like inventory concerns, logistical issues, market shifts, changing news stories. It sounds like there's a lot of other things that can factor into budget adjustments. So how do you steer the aircraft carrier at that level of spend while you're factoring out all these other like real life situations?
Yeah, I really try to approach the brand, when we're setting targets and monthly goals. We'll first map out what promotions are coming down the line that month. And then if they're a big one, for instance, 4th of July coming up or, Memorial Day, sometimes, your reps can do what's called a headroom analysis, and that'll actually they'll run a model that shows you like where you might be reaching diminishing returns on that sale period based on previous year's sales periods. The thing that you can do is work with and really calibrate where that channel allocation needs to be with either your measurement partner or whoever's on your team that's running measurement for the business as a whole. But then really forecasting, I try to look for a daily average, saying, all right, here's our promotion spend for the month, but here's our BAU daily average that we need to be around, and then pace to that daily average. And then from there, I'll know that the account might be able to spend, X amount per day. And I'll go in now on the larger accounts, it's more on a weekly or twice a week sort of basis where I'll go and I'll adjust the allocation between campaigns. We might have one product that's doing well or one category that's doing extremely well that week and another one that's not. I might shift budget, or we might need to reprioritize spend to another SKU that maybe has been slow and is kind of under target in regards to their pacing. The internal account changes, those are less planned. Those are more performance based, but the blended account daily spend is we try to keep within a certain daily range.
That makes sense. And I guess you got to look at the company's available inventory. They've got new products coming in. You look at the room they have in their warehouse. Like there's so many other variables that are going to dictate which ad set or which product category you're putting budget to.
Yeah, absolutely. And inventory is a big thing, especially in apparel, where sizing is a big factor to consider. You might have some sizes that are in stock, but then the most popular size might be out of stock. So you're not necessarily going to get a flag on your catalog that says, hey, this is inventory is almost out, depending on how the catalog's set up. So you really want to be focused on that inventory piece and be looped in with the e-commerce side of, knowing like, hey, we're spending on this, ad or planning to spend on this ad, but inventory is limited. I think in general, that's a feedback loop that needs to be fixed. There's a lot of opportunity there to kind of create better feedback between product and advertising or e-commerce and advertising, where, that team is really informing the advertisers like, hey, here's our run rate on this product and we're going to be out by this date at this current velocity, and getting those insights back. I imagine there's probably an opportunity for an app out there that can automate this for a lot of advertisers, because it is something that does affect. And Meta's doing some updates that are helping with that on the feed side, but I still think that there's a gap there that needs to be filled.
Yeah, I totally agree. I know in some situations, if you use a collection or a catalog ad, then you can tie the collection related to the inventory that you have, but I don't think it correlates to sizing. So I know that if you ran out of like a particular sweater completely, then that won't show in the catalog ad, but it doesn't correlate back to sizing. And it doesn't work for non-catalog ads, which is going to be the majority of type of creative that you're running anyways. It's probably going to be like a video, right? So
Exactly.
yeah, that's pretty interesting. And then how much of that is budget and campaign control versus just ordering? Because I know the majority of apparel is going to be For men's, medium larges. For women's, usually small, medium, especially if it's activewear. But what percentage of that is just understanding your demographic and your ordering versus could you adjust targeting to push, like, let's say XL sizes or extra small sizes?
You could. It's a lot more difficult to target based on sizes. In Meta, you can break out variants in your catalog, which, really for apparel, that's how it should be broken down so that it's not delivering variants that aren't, as popular.
Sure.
Um, it's something that, yeah, we have a lot less control of, but we try to let Meta just kind of deliver what it thinks is going to get the best results.
Yeah.
Um, they have made improvements like, some of their site link features, their catalog features, or advantage, product features to like regular, vertical video ads has been a big unlock for some clients. Others, it can be a little disruptive because you might have an ad that amends site links to it and you'll be running an ad for one SKU, but the site links are going to be related to another SKU or another landing page that just got picked up. So you want to be careful there because you might end up actually sending a lot of traffic to a page that you don't necessarily intend to.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, if we feel like it's flying an aircraft carrier, imagine how Meta feels with all these advertisers and all these variables that contribute to it. But
Yeah,
I
exactly.
wanted to shift gears. I had a question, and this is a question that I've had forever, and I imagine that a lot of other e-commerce brands do too. When it comes to sales season, you have a budget allocated, and I've always had the internal debate, is it better to be early or is it better to be late and catch people when they know it's sales time? Like Black Friday, I see these sales come out 2 weeks early. But is that too soon? Is it not? Does it depend on the brand? How do you think about launching sales or like discount campaigns?
Yeah, I've come to decide that it really comes down to the brand and the consumer. Um, if you have a brand that has a really high repeat purchase rate, so maybe it's beauty or a consumable or something where customers are naturally coming back a lot, um, I've found now this isn't the case all the time, but I've found with accounts that we've worked on that those brands that have a really high repeat purchase rate, shorter sales cycles at higher volume do better. Whereas
Interesting.
another brand that maybe has a little bit longer sales cycle involved and they don't have a high repeat rate, the longer sales cycle or the longer, promo cycle does better. For instance, we have an apparel brand that, 2 years ago, we were running our sales for like 2 weeks. 4th of July started in the middle of June almost. Now we
Mm.
shortened that up now to where we found like the sweet spot right now is about a week. Um, I think last year a lot of brands were just overly promo and it really saturated their audiences, saturated their brand, kind of diminished their brand quality. So brands now are trying to kind of steer away from that being overly promo. And on the promo side, I think there's an element of getting creative with the way that you do it too. It doesn't just have to be a flat 20% off, for a week. It can be it can start at maybe 15% off and then move up to 20% off over the weekend or you can do like a you know a free shipping promo with 10% off a certain product or just thinking as creative as possible in regards to how you position the promo and then working with the product and e-commerce team to kind of figure out which type of promotion is going to have the biggest net value to the business after that weekend or week that you're running it.